Hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of this tutorial that I have created to create about TanStack Query in React. So this tutorial is going to teach you how you can, start using TanStack Query to communicate with the backend API and, implement different operations like the create operation, delete, update, and so on. In order to kind of understand the concepts in this tutorial, you should be familiar with React. So you need to know the basics of React, and you need to know how to communicate with an API. You need to understand like HTTP requests, responses, like using fetch API, using maybe Axios. So for these different concepts and let's say techniques, they're tutorials on my channel. So first off, I'm assuming that you're already familiar with these. So the basics of React and how to communicate with the backend API. So if, for example, you know how to fetch some resources from a backend endpoint or how to post to a backend endpoint, you're fine, right? And if you do not know anything about TanStack Query, again, you're fine, because that is the topic of this series. So in this series, we're going to take everything in a kind of a step-by-step, approach. We're going to set up a backend API, and then we're going to set up our React application and fetch the different resources that backend API provides using TanStack Query. I am probably going to create another, playlist about the different techniques that you can use in order to communicate with a backend API in React applications. I don't want to compare the different techniques here because I want to focus solely on TanStack Query, right? So TanStack Query helps us to, communicate with the backend API in a very smooth manner. I mean, if you are familiar with other techniques of communicating with the backend API, you will certainly appreciate the ease of, communicating with an API using TanStack Query. So this is episode number 1. As I told you, we're going to build a sample application. My notes are here in this instance of my VS Code, and the project that we're going to work on is on my other display. And I am going to take you through the different steps gradually, right, so that you understand what we are going to achieve, what we are going to, accomplish. And if you enjoy watching these series, please let me know in the comment section. Give the videos a like so that more people can watch them. That really helps me, motivates me to create more videos like these. So let's get started. I told you episode number 1, we're going to set up our backend API, right? So as I told you, TanStack Query is like a tool, let's say, that allows us to communicate with the backend API, and it kind of allows us to do so in a very smooth manner. I don't want to compare TanStack Query with other approaches here, right? With, for example, something like asynchronous thunks or, different techniques, because I want to, as I said, solely focus on TanStack Query. But just know that TanStack Query is an approach to communicate with the backend API, right? To fetch resources, to cache them, to update them, right? In a very smooth approach. So for this tutorial, we're going to create a backend API using a plugin called local JSON Server or JSON Server that allows us to create some, files as our data, and then we're going to, run the application, and then we're going to have a simple API with different backend endpoints that we can communicate with. So this allows us to, move rapidly and start talking about TanStack Query. And I mean, I have decided to take this approach because I want to be able to control the backend API as well. So of course, you could communicate with a backend API that is already out there, like for example, the API that GitHub provides. But in this case, I want to have a backend API of my own with the data that I want, and then I want to be able to communicate with that backend API. But because the focus is not on the API development here, I want to have, a simple API. That is the reason why I have decided to go with JSON Server. So the backend project, right, is a very simple project. It uses JSON Server, right? And then the application that we're going to create is a React application using Vite. Some people pronounce it Vite. I prefer to pronounce it Vite because Vite comes from a French word, means fast, right? So it is probably, it has to do something with that word. And then, yeah, we're going to install the necessary packages for TanStack Query in our React application. And then we will run, of course, our backend API. And then we will be able to communicate with that backend API. So right now, our backend API has these, let's say, files in it. So we've got user.json, we've got post.json, and we've got categories.json. Let me take you to this window of my Visual Studio. This is the application that will serve as our backend API, right? So if you take a look here, I've installed this, this NPM package called JSON Server. And this is my starter script. So I'm going to run the JSON Server in watch mode, right? Having this file, fake APIs, index.json, index.js on port 5000. And now, if you take a look at this folder, I've got my different files here. So for example, the users, right? The users.json file, which acts like, let's say, a kind of a resource, right? A table of different, let's say, instances of a user, and I've got 3 users here. And then I will be able to communicate with this backend, right? In order to fetch users, for example, based on their IDs. Then I've got posts. Posts have ID, category ID, title. I've got the author. The author is like let's say, a nested object inside of this object. And the author has an ID, name, and email. Of course, I could connect one post with an author using the author ID, very similar to what we are doing here with category, but I have decided to have author as a nested object inside of each post. So right now there are 2 objects here, posts. Then I've got categories. So for categories, I've got 2 objects with different IDs and the title, right? So this is the backend API that we've got. And of course, inside of index.js, I am importing these, right? And I am, providing different endpoints so that the API can communicate, the front-end application can communicate with. So if, for example, I come here and I run my, script, not npm run dev, but npm run start. npm run start. If I run this, you will see that this is the command that we are running. And in a couple of seconds, you will see that the API will start running on this, address, and we've got these different endpoints to communicate with. So the API is, of course, running on my local machine. I've got different endpoints. I can send different HTTP requests to these endpoints, like, for example, fetching a single post using the ID, fetching all of them, seeing the categories, updating them, and so on. So this is the simple backend API that we're going to communicate with. I told you the focus of this course is not the backend API thing. It's not API development, but rather the front-end side, the React application. This is the reason why I have decided to not go through the let's say process of developing a full-fledged API, but use this simple JSON server package in order to create like an API rapidly. And now we are ready to develop our front-end application and communicate with this. And in the notes, if you take a look here, these are all the files that I showed you inside of the other instance of my Visual Studio Code. And I decided to show you the exact files instead of showing you these here. So again, there are different files. There's nothing stopping us from creating other files, and all we need to do is to create a separate file for, I don't know, like let's say employees, topics, whatever, and then import them here inside of this index.json. Afterwards, we need to, of course, install this, right? And then you can, as I said, you can, navigate to the JSON files inside of your, folders, and then you can run the npm start, and then you will see the different endpoints as I showed you. And then the next step for us is to create our React application using Vite. So this is the command that you're going to have to run, right? So of course you run your application using you create your application using Vite. This is the name of the application, right? And then you install the different dependencies. I have already done that as well. So I have created a sample React application for the front end. I will keep the backend running, right? The backend, the API that I just showed you, will keep running in the backend, and from the React application, we will be able to, let's say, communicate with that. And of course, after that, we need to install the TanStack Query and its DevTools. Its DevTools allows us to be able to, for example, debug the application, right? Again, the focus of this tutorial is not the DevTools of React Query. I want to focus solely on React Query and how it allows us to communicate with the backend API. So this is the package you need to install. This is the core library for TanStack Query, right? And of course, the DevTools, you can install the DevTools as well, which, as I told you, provide helpful development tools. So this is the command that you need to run after you create your application using the Vite, let's say, tool. So npm install TanStack React Query, right? And of course, I am going to install the DevTools as well. As I told you, I've already done that. I'm going to show you probably from the next episode. And then I want to talk a little bit about the application and the TanStack Query. Now let me take you to the other window that I've got here for Visual Studio, and I'm going to show you what I've done. So this is the application that I told you we will create, right? The front-end application. Of course, we are on this branch, end of episode 2. So this is what we will create in episode 2, right? So we will have our components, right? We will have some setup here, but I just wanted to, show you this. As you can see here, I've got my package.json. Inside of here, I have installed TanStack React Query and TanStack React Query DevTools. And I have created this project using Vite, and this is the command that we will run in order to run the application. I just wanted to show you, to give you a preview of the application that we will create in the next episode. And this application, through the different setup, through the different files that we will create, will start communicating with that backend API that I just showed you. Now let's go back to the notes and talk a little bit about React Query. I want to zoom in so that I can talk about the benefits of using React Query. So understanding React Query and DevTools. React Query is a powerful library for asynchronous state management, asynchronous. So as I told you, it kind of abstracts many of the difficulties and the boilerplate code that you need to write yourself if you want to communicate with a backend API or manage the state of the application in an asynchronous approach. It simplifies, as I showed you, the process of fetching, caching, synchronizing, and updating data from your backend instead of manually handling loading state, error states, caching, logic. React Query provides built-in solutions leading to more maintainable and performant applications. I've got another playlist on my channel about state management in React using Redux. If you are, if you are interested, you can take a look at that playlist as well. I'm going to create a playlist for using asynchronous thunks as well that can again help you to understand the benefits of React Query, because using thunks you will have to write a lot of code when you want to manage the state of the application in an asynchronous manner. But with this library, everything is going to be very simplified. The fetching, the caching, the synchronization, and updating the data from your backend is going to be very simple. So let's talk about the advantages of React Query. So automatic caching. React Query caches fetch data in the background. This reduces the need for redundant API calls and improving performance. Background updates. It automatically refetches data in the background when it becomes stale, ensuring your UI always displays the most up-to-date information. I'm going to probably create examples for each one of these advantages so that you can, see them in practice. Optimistic updates. React Query allows you to optimistically update the UI before the server responds, providing a smoother user experience. We will explore this later in the tutorial. Simplified data fetching and logic. So because TanStack Query provides hooks like use mutation, use query, it kind of abstracts away much of the boilerplate code when you want to do data fetching. So without TanStack Query, you need to write a lot of code when you want to fetch some data from a backend API. But using TanStack Query, there are some hooks that you can use in order to do the data fetching, in order to do the mutation, and so on. So DevTools integration, I told you React Query comes with a DevTools that provides like provides some different techniques for inspecting the application, for managing the cache, queries, mutations. So it can be very helpful when you want to debug your application. There are other options that I told you about, like using the Fetch API or something like Axios, right? For state management. In that case, you need to do everything manually with promises. And of course, this is very complicated. I am going to create a playlist for these as well. I am probably going to compare them. But React Query has many advantages. One very big advantage that you will start to appreciate is the, let's say the fewer lines of code that you need to write in order to accomplish the same thing. So if, for example, you're not using React Query, you will have to write a lot of code to implement caching, to implement asynchronous data management, to implement, let's say, background updates. But with React Query, much of these are abstracted. Reduce boilerplate, as I told you, right? You write less code to handle common data fetching concerns. Improved performance. Automatic caching and background updates, optimize data flow, better user experience. Features like optimistic updates that I'm going to show you, and automatic retries. I'm going to show you this as well. Contribute to a smoother user interface. Simplified state management. So React Query manages the state of your asynchronous operations, reducing the complexity of your component state. I really don't like, teaching you guys using the notes and reading a bunch of sentences. I want you to take to the code and show you what these mean in action and how to implement them, how to take advantage of these different features. And I am going to do that starting from episode number 2. So this is the end of episode number 1, right? In this episode, we kind of created a backend API using JSON Server. We set up the application, the React application, using Vite. We installed the TanStack Query, packages. And from the next episode, we are going to dive deep into the concepts of React Query. We're going to create our query client, and I'm going to run the application. I'm going to show you in action how to use the hooks that React Query provides in our components, how to communicate with the backend API, and how simple it is compared to the other techniques that are available when you want to communicate with the backend API. That's when you will really start appreciating the beauty of using React Query TanStack Query inside of your applications. That's a wrap for this video. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. If that's the case, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and I will see you in the next one.